All right. Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Torah Talk. I have today with me my good friend, Zac Waller. And I know a lot of you know Zac and certainly know about HaYovel. So they do amazing things, like really prophetic, miraculous work. And maybe Zac could explain a little bit more than I could. Zac, tell us a little bit about yourself before you start talking about HaYovel. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi Tuli, for doing this. It's really a pleasure to study with you and be with you today, as we can't be together in person too much these days. It's nice to, at least we can still connect online like this. So thank you for putting this together. So I'm Zac Waller. I'm the executive director of HaYovel, which is a Hebrew word that means the Jubilee. And so basically what we do is we bring Christian volunteers from all over the world. We've had about 32 different countries that have come and volunteered with the agriculture here in the land of Israel. One of the big things that we're going to be talking about in this study is the agricultural restoration of Israel. And so that's what we realized about 15 years ago, is that there's something really big going on in the land of Israel that the Christian community is largely unaware of, that we need to get connected to and be part of. So that's what we do. We connect Christians all over the world to the agricultural restoration that's going on here, allow them to bless and serve through volunteering, and to connect to the land and the people. We even tour around a little bit, get to visit the biblical sites. And so that's really what we're all about, is connecting Christians to Israel through hands-on service, blessing and serving the nation and people of Israel.
And what about you? You were born in Kentucky, right?
That's correct. I was actually born in Kentucky, but we quickly moved to Florida. I was like 6 months old or something. Moved to Florida for like a year or two, and then so I basically consider myself a Tennessee boy, actually, because I was pretty much raised in Tennessee. So.
And then how long have you been in Israel?
Let's see. So I made my first trip in 2004. And then, so it was kind of just really back and forth for a good, 10 years after that. And then just in the last 3 years or so, we've been here more full time. And yeah, just really focus in on hosting people here in the land. So it's become a full-time thing here.
Now tell me about, how many people have you hosted?
Let's see. So our number, I think we're over 3,000 volunteers that we've hosted here. Yeah, on the mountains of Samaria.
So you brought 3,000 people, and you're harvesting and you're pruning, and what else are you doing?
Those are the two main things. The harvest is like the really big critical thing, and that happens from August to around November, right in that area, that time frame. So that's like the really big time. That's really when the most help is needed here in the land of Israel. And then the pruning also is a big time as well. It's an all men's trip. So for harvest, we've had up to about 200 people here at one time, 200 volunteers. And then for pruning, I think our max is around 75, something like that. But yeah, those are our two main things that we do. And then the last year or so, we've been getting more into tree planting, which we can do that almost year round. So that's another one of our projects that we've kind of put in. It's really amazing. Got some really awesome stuff going on with the tree planting, which we partner with you guys on some of that. And then a huge part of what we do is getting the word out. We do a weekly podcast, do things like that, because we've realized that, for us, we had no idea what was going on here in the land of Israel. And just a simple conversation, talking to people who had been here, we were like, whoa, how come we never heard about this? So we're like, okay, we don't want, the problem that we used to have to be other people's problem. We need to get this word out. We need to tell people about what's going on here and share the word. And we call it the Joshua and Caleb report, because we feel like with all of the bad news going out about Israel, it's kind of like the 10 spies in the Joshua and Caleb story. So we want to be the Joshua and Caleb voice in this generation to say, okay, there are some issues, there are giants, but God is more than able to overcome these obstacles and to fulfill his word and his promises to his people. And so that's a huge part of what we do too, is getting the word out, educating Christians about what's happening in the land of Israel, and again, getting them connected and making this a reality in their lives.
So you're like educating people beyond what you do. You're talking about just in general, like news and.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of people would say maybe we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot marketing wise, because we talk about all kinds of stuff and not necessarily just about what we do. And so some of our marketing is, but you need to focus in on it. Just tell people exactly what you need, what you do, and get them to be there to volunteer. Like, well, okay, yeah, that's a big part. But we feel like there's so much about Israel that needs to be understood. There's so many questions that people have. What's going on in Israel? Is it against international law for the settlements to be there? Is it, these kind of things? So they're definitely connected to what we do. But there's just a lot of misinformation out there. And so we really feel like it's important to get the truth out there to people so that they can understand what's really going on. And the reality is there's just not much, information out there that's readily available. Or maybe the reality is there's just a flood of misinformation. So it seems like there's not much information. And so we want to combat that and get as much information as we can out there. So that's really why we started the podcast, the Josh and Caleb Report podcast, is because we thought, you know what, there are no Christians here in this particular area, in the heartland of Israel, in Judea and Samaria, that are telling people what's actually happening here day to day, week to week, so that they know how to pray. A lot of Christians want to pray for Israel, but they don't really know exactly what's going on, so they can't pray very effectively. So that's what we wanted to do with the podcast, and say, hey, this is what's happening. So we're not only sharing, hey, you need to come volunteer, but we're saying, hey, this is what happened last week here in the heartland of Israel. And you need to understand this so that you know how to pray, so that you know how to bless and serve and support the people that are here and the Jewish people that are coming back and resettling the land. So yeah, a lot of education we do. And I actually just finished and published a devotional as well that I'm really excited about, that I just put out, called Christians Meet Israel. So that's another one of our educational things. And I'm hoping to get into a lot more writing soon. So that's another thing that we're just kind of getting started on.
Well, good for you. I love that. There are a couple, I love everything you do. And I think Tommy just joined us. So I wanted to welcome Tommy and everybody else who is who's listening to this podcast. But I love a couple of things that you do in particular. Number one is that obviously, like you said, there are very few Christians who are in the land. There's a lot of Christians who love Israel, but are not able to articulate necessarily why that is. They feel an emotional connection, but because you're here on the ground and everybody knows you, and you have you've developed such a great reputation and have so many friends here, that you really have your ear to the ground. You have your boots on the ground, you have your ear to the ground, and you're able to really like convey in such an authentic Christian voice that I think Christians around the world really, really appreciate. But also everything you do is like first class and top notch, beautiful. And so, the Joshua and Caleb Report is just so well produced, and that's Israel really needs, people like yourself. And I'm so appreciative that you are doing what you're doing.
Yeah, we are very honored to be a part. I think my dad has said many times, we're about 2,000 years late on this thing. They're getting in here and getting going. So we're just very blessed that God has enabled us to see the reality of what's going on and to give us this place. It's unbelievable. I have to just, pinch myself every once in a while and be like, wait, am I really like on the Mount of Blessing and able to bring in the nations to see what's going on in the land of Israel and to see the vineyards, blossoming, blooming, producing beautiful fruit right outside my window right here. And it really is, it's overwhelming to see that this is happening, that the nations who ever have come against Israel, and now, there's people that are turning and coming to bless and support. For me to kind of be a part of helping other people make that journey to come here and be part of what's going on. It's really an honor for me and a privilege to be able to be part of this. And so we're very blessed to have to be here and to be a part.
Our privilege. I feel the same way. I've been able to, raise the first generation of Jewish children in the land of Israel, and like literally, God knows how long. Only God would know how long that my family was, whether we were exiled with I don't even know. And so it is a privilege. We are Kohanim. We're priests from the from the line of Aaron, the priest, the high priest. And so I'm able to, like I really think about that often. We say a special priestly blessing, the Aaronic blessing every day in synagogue. So when I am able to do that with my son, I have a 10-year-old boy, and now we have actually, so the synagogues are shut down, right? The whole country is pretty much shut down. The synagogues are shut down, and so we found a workaround because everybody could pray by themselves, of course, but we pray in a minyan with 10 others or 9 others with 10 Jewish men. That's how we pray every morning, every evening, every afternoon. And so we're doing it from our homes, not with Zoom. We're actually going out on our porch, and because we kind of live in a courtyard, so there's like a number of other families who are able to join us. And so for the first time, I have my son praying with me every morning because he usually prays in school. There is no school. And so we're able to do that priestly blessing together. And now it's really amazing because my 4-year-old son, is also joining us. And so
that's amazing.
It is amazing. And it's like very special all the time living here in Israel. And, just before we get into the Torah study, you mentioned that you just put out a devotional. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the devotional and where people can find it.
Yeah, so I think we literally just sent the email out yesterday or something saying, hey, it's available on the HaYovel store or whatever. So yeah, I had wanted to do some writing, and I felt like, after being here for a while, like you said, when we first came, it is hard to articulate exactly what's going on. You feel this emotion, your heart, it just gets so connected, and you're like, whoa, something's going on here. And I don't even know how to say it, but it seems very godly. And then you find one verse and you're like, oh yeah, that's what this is. This is this. And there must be more. And you find another one and it's like, oh yeah. Oh, and hey, we can connect these. And this makes more sense because of that. And people get together and study like this, and you go, oh yeah, I never thought about it that way before. And there's just been so many of those moments as we've studied together, and as we've studied together with you guys, with the Jewish people, and understand some of the Jewish perspective on things. And so I just thought, wow, I really feel like after being here now for over 15 years, that maybe I could kind of compile some of those thoughts and things that we've learned over the last, good while, and being here in the land. And so I thought about just writing just a regular book, just kind of read through things. But I thought, you know what, actually, I think it'd be more powerful to do a devotional where people are coming at this from more of a mindset of prayer and looking at the scriptures and kind of meditating on those. And so I actually kind of like to write very bullet point, kind of like, keep thoughts. So it's actually worked out really great. So I have the scripture verse, and then a thought, and then an action question, and then a place to write out some notes in the book. And I thought, I pray that this would be a really great tool for people to just kind of work through some of the questions, because there are a lot of questions, especially for us Christians. Like, okay, how do we deal with this? There's all this replacement theologies, or certain different levels of replacement theology that have really gotten into the church within Christianity and caused horrific things to happen in history. And what do we do now? How do we relate to Israel? How do we relate to the land of Israel? What about the Jewish people? How are we connected? What does all this mean? And there's just a lot of questions. And so my goal with the devotional was just to go through and try to give some biblical foundation for how to answer those questions. And so it's on our website. It's available on our website at HaYovel. It's HaYovel.com/store. Or if you just go to the website, you can find it. Or if you have a hard time with a HaYovel word, just go to serveisrael.com, and you can find it there.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. I had a similar sort of path. I was writing a lot about Israel, and I went through the Bible myself, isolating, sort of identifying all the places that talk about Israel. I never realized, as a Jew growing up and reading the Bible, but I never really realized how frequently Israel comes up in every page and every chapter of the Bible. And so after a bunch of years of doing that, put together the Israel Bible, which I see. I'm very proud to see it behind you.
Ta-da!
There you go. That's a good endorsement. I appreciate that. But it's, so that was, I'm sure like your devotional, a passion project. But then I don't know if you saw in the news this week, a Danish ministry came out with a Bible where they basically scrubbed Israel out of the Bible. I don't know if it's just the New Testament or maybe the Old Testament, and I don't know, but they took out the word Israel from their Bible, which made me realize that, the Israel Bible, I'm so happy that I did it, because it stands exactly the opposite. It's all about Israel. The Bible is all about Israel. And I'm just thinking that, like, what you're doing, and just like emphasizing how taking Israel out of the Bible is like taking God out of the Bible. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, I just wrote an article for Yom HaShoah, for the Holocaust Remembrance Day, where I said basically at the conclusion of the article was being anti-Semitic or hating Jewish people is equal to hating God, because that's what happened, in the Holocaust and every other time that Amalek rose up to take out the Jewish people. It was them fighting against God, trying to snuff out that light that God's trying to bring to the world. So I think if we as Christians could just understand, hey, when we need to do the opposite, instead of persecuting and criticizing and hating Jewish people, if we could do the opposite, we can bless and serve and support. We can be part of getting that light spread out to the world. And I think it's just a fundamental thing that you need to understand. And like you said, this Danish thing, I had heard about that. It's so crazy, but it's the opposite. It's agreeing with the Amalek. It's agreeing with trying to put out the light, trying to disconnect the source of the light that's supposed to be coming out. And the only thing that's going to accomplish is to put the light out. And we know that that's not going to happen, because God is with Israel and the Jewish people. And so that's a huge reason why I'm so just privileged to be part of this, because it's like I'm joining myself to the light, and that's where I want to be. So
beautiful,
it's a good thing.
Okay, so we said that we're going to study today from Jeremiah,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
And we chose Jeremiah because, I mean, this is one of those times where, often the Bible, was written a long time ago. Sometimes it feels like it's archaic, ancient, and maybe not so relevant. And for all of these centuries, people were reading the Bible and didn't really know what to make of it, because it didn't sound like an actual realistic book of, nonfiction. It sounded more like it was fictional. However, so you had these verses that people would read, and think about it, if you were reading this in, the medieval times, or even, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. So it talks about in Jeremiah chapter 31 that the land of Israel was wilderness. Okay, that we know, that was easy to recognize, and that was easy to see. But then it says that again, you shall plant vineyards, and this is in verse 4, at least in the Israel Bible, it's in verse 4, but maybe it's verse 5. It says, again, you shall plant vineyards on the hills of Samaria. Men shall plant and live to enjoy them. And you're thinking to yourself, like, come on, like, how is that possible? People are going to go and plant vineyards on the hills of Samaria, right? I mean, it sounds crazy. And now, so here you are doing exactly that.
Yeah, it's been really amazing. I think not only is the Bible, people, it's sometimes hard to connect with it, but also agriculture. In today's world, you just usually are able to go to the store, and I guess we've been able to do that still, get our groceries, and just walk in and grab stuff. We're kind of disconnected from the farming aspect. From this actually has to grow in the ground and be harvested and all these kind of things. So I think it's kind of a little bit of a double whammy there. It's like, oh, maybe this just applies to back then, and we don't really relate to agriculture very much in today's time. But I think it's really important, to realize that this is prophetic. This is talking about something that will be. And I love Jeremiah 31. It's obviously one of our favorite chapters. But one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite chapters is because it goes through and talks about redemption. Basically, by the time you get to the end, it's talking about everybody coming to the knowledge of God, and no more somebody having to teach their neighbor, because everybody knows. And in this chapter, that's not where it starts, though. It actually kind of gives a little bit of a timeline, kind of a layout. It says that God will be the God of Israel again. It says that and then it goes into how he will build Israel, how he will restore the agriculture. And then it goes into how the Jewish people will return to the land of Israel. And then it talks about how there'll be this final redemption when everybody will know God. And so to me, that's why this vineyard thing is such a big deal, is because it's a precursor. It's like a little stepping stone getting to this process, and it's connected somehow. I think that's the kind of the big thing, is sometimes we just skip through and go, oh, that's relevant to me, this thing of redemption. But to back up and say, well, wait a second, somehow, again, there's this connection with Israel and this redemptive light that's going into all the world. Somehow, the land of Israel being rebuilt and vineyards being planted and Jewish people returning from the four corners of the earth back to the land of Israel is part of the end result of having redemption and light and the knowledge of God throughout the entire world. And so to me, that's why this vineyard thing is such a big deal, is because they're not just vineyards. They're prophecy fulfilled, and they're a huge banner that says God is doing the first steps of the final redemption. Like, we're right at this time right now in our day where we can see these vineyards. These vineyards were not here for 2,000 years. And then all of a sudden, here comes these, the mountains are shooting forth their branches, like it talks about in Ezekiel. And it's happening right now. And so I think this is, like I said, like a banner to the world saying, hey, look at Israel, look over here. The mountains are shooting forth their branches. The vineyards are back on the mountains. The Jewish people are returning back from the four corners of the earth. Something's going on over here. You guys need to look and pay attention, because God's doing something. And this is the beginning of the final deal, where the light of God, the knowledge of God, covers the entire earth as water covers the sea, right? Isaiah talks about that. So that's why I get really excited about vineyards, because this is the banner. It's the thing. It's the beginning of what we're all working towards, and the final redemption.
I'm glad you mentioned that, that the focus on agriculture, because agriculture was always like super relevant for everybody. People were farmers. And now in our generation, people have really moved away from the farm and moved away from agriculture. You think that wine comes from the wine store. You don't think about, that
Right.
wine has to grow somewhere. But, I think that God has sent us a really strong reminder in the last couple of weeks that agriculture is directly like a sign of God's blessing. And when, and we're so much more connected to this kind of reward and punishment like we have throughout the Bible. Like, if you are good, I will send you rains in your proper times. And if you are bad, there will be drought. And you're seeing that, like today, I was reading the newspaper, and it's talking about how farmers in Ohio, where I'm from, are dumping tons and tons of gallons of milk, right? They're killing, in America, they're killing poultry, because they can't possibly like get it onto the tables. The whole supply chains are messed up because of the coronavirus. They're burning agriculture. And you haven't ever seen this in world history. They don't want to be doing it, and they know that there's a lot of people who need this food, but they're burning, or they're putting it back into the ground. They're like, kind of chopping it up and putting the onions and the potatoes back into the ground, because they can't possibly get it to people's plates. And so like, it's like such an eerie sign from God of how, when there's a plague going on in the world, it like directly affects the agriculture. But when there's blessing in the world, and certainly when there's blessing on Israel, you see the land coming to life again. So let's just jump to, because when I read, Jeremiah 31, probably when a lot of Jewish people are reading the Bible, when it says that, you shall plant vineyards on the hills of Chamron, we probably, a lot of Jews think that the Bible is really talking to Jewish people only. And like, yeah, there's sort of like non-Jews who are mentioned in the Bible, but they're kind of, we don't really think too much about the role of non-Jews in the Bible, right? But, obviously when it's talking about the planting that's going on, it's not only talking about the Jewish people, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so that's the exciting part here in Jeremiah 31:5. We have this thing of planting vineyards, but that's about all we have location there, right? Vineyards on the mountains of Samaria, but that's about all we get there, and that we're going to be able to eat the fruit. But then Isaiah 61 verse 5 actually says, it's one of our poster verses, one of the ones we get really excited about. In Isaiah 61 verse 5, it says, strangers shall stand and tend your flocks, and foreigners shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers. And so it's funny, we actually came here back in 2004 and got introduced to a vineyard owner, and we were farmers in the States. So when we started working in some of the farming and stuff here, we're like, oh, well, maybe this is a way we can come in and just bless and serve and help and be a part of this really amazing thing that's happening in the land of Israel. And actually, one of the rabbis in Har Bracha actually came to us and showed us this verse. We didn't even know about it until after we had already started being a part of what's happening here. And they said, hey, do you know that you're actually fulfilling this verse in Isaiah? And we're like, whoa, we never even saw that before. Like, how do you read through and not even see this stuff? But it's right there that the foreigners, people from outside of Israel, are going to come in and actually be the vine dressers. And so obviously those will be the vines that were planted on the mountains of Samaria that Jeremiah talks about. And so there's definitely a place for the nations to come in. And, it makes a lot of sense to me, what you're saying, that, you as the Jewish people have had, this time of not really knowing that there was a connection to the nations, or how does this work? That makes a lot of sense to me because of historical things that have happened where Christians have done horrific things towards the Jewish people. That it makes a lot of sense. But what I've realized and have been so humbled that people like you are invite me to study with you on here, somebody that's a non-Jew, or that the community of Har Bracha allows me to come and be here in their community and help with their vineyards. It's a miracle to me that I'm even able to be here, that you guys accept us to be able to come in. To be honest, I don't really know why you do, why you forgive us of all the things that have happened for so many thousands of years. And it's something that really means a lot to me, that you guys are like actually opening yourself up and saying, hey, yeah, let's study the scriptures. Let's do these things together. It's something that has never happened. But then going back and looking at the scripture, it seems like this is God's plan from the very beginning with Abraham. He calls him out and says, you're going to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. So he called a specific people in order to get this, to spread this light into the entire world. And then the prophets talk about being a light to the nations. And so, some people have actually taken this verse in Isaiah 61:5 and said, well, it says foreigners will be your plowmen and your vine dressers. That almost sounds like, some slaves or something they've got bringing in to do this. And I'm like, well, okay, but this is God speaking here. He has a really good plan for this. And maybe he had a little bit different idea. Maybe he wanted to bring people who were just willing to come and volunteer, to come in and be a part. Maybe people from the nations would all of a sudden see that there's a God in Israel who is doing a great and mighty things, and they actually want to partner with him to rebuild the land. And so it's not some, demeaning place or something to come in. It actually is a huge privilege to be able to come in and to be a part of what God's doing here. So I'm very, very humble, but I can see in the scripture how this was the plan all along, for the nations to have an invitation to come. And in Isaiah 56 talks about that the temple, in Zion will be a house of prayer for all nations. There's always been this like invitation for the nations to come and be a part, but it's never really happened before. It hasn't happened that the nations, that's another really amazing thing, that we live in a time right now where here I am, this, Tennessee boy sitting on the Mount of Blessing, and I'm trying to get as many people from the nations as I can to come and see what I've seen and experience what I've experienced. There's just something really phenomenal, like that's never happened before in the history of the world that's going on right now. And like I said, I'm very humbled and, very obviously repentant for what's happened in the past. And I feel like that I have an opportunity to kind of bring reparation to all that historical stuff by bringing the nations in to now fulfill these good prophecies where we can build up the land of Israel and be a part of that. So it's an amazing thing for me to be a part of this.
Well, yeah, but one thing that you said that really, I think, resonated with me, again, I'm thinking a lot about the times that we're living in and how unusual they are. None of us have really ever lived through a pandemic like we're we're going through. And, you know, the Bible and the verses that you were talking about talk about how everybody's going to be coming to Israel, Jew and non-Jew together, coming to the temple, coming to Jerusalem, coming to plant, coming to prune. And and it is a privilege, but at the same time, you know, God just shut that off completely, right? No one is allowed to come into the land of Israel right now. And it's really like a scary thing, because throughout the Bible, the greatest blessing on Jerusalem was when it will be described as a place where there will be young people and old people and children and brides and grooms in the cities and in the towns and the squares of Jerusalem. And the biggest curse of Jerusalem is when it will be desolate, or when the land will be desolate, void of people, void of agriculture. And it's kind of scary because, you know, God and overnight showed us how quickly, if we don't take advantage of the blessing, how quickly that could turn. What do you have to say? Do you have any final thoughts on the time that we're in right now?
It is sobering to look at. You know, we've talked about it a lot on our podcast. This whole thing of the deal of the century. You know, all the nations came together with the United States kind of at the head, saying, "Hey, we should divide Israel. We should, you know, give up this section of land to the Palestinians and create a state for them." You know, am I going to say that that's directly connected to the coronavirus and why the nations now aren't allowed to come in? I know I can't say that, obviously, but I think we need to look at that. Like, we need to see, like, okay, what's going on here? Is this connected somehow? The scriptures are very clear about it is not a good idea to divide the land. And so I think, you know, it could very well be connected. You know, there's been books written. Bill Koenig, I think is his name, wrote a book about how every time that a U.S. president would do something against Israel, immediately some disaster would take place, a hurricane or a tornado, or it's crazy. And it would be within like 48 hours, like the decision would be made and then boom, they would be hit with something crazy. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that what we're seeing right now is a directly connected to this decision. You know, the President Trump put this out there, and obviously I want to say he's done a lot for Israel. He's done a lot of really great things, and I don't want to belittle those at all. That's been really amazing. But in this one thing, this is really serious. You know, you can't give away the biblical heartland of Israel to Israel's enemies. That's not a good thing. And I think it could be directly related to this, and it could be why privileges are being taken away. Now you can't, you know, come to the land of Israel and be part of this. I think there could definitely be a connection there, and it should sober us. It should push us to prayer, and to, like Solomon talks about when he's dedicating the temple. He says that even a foreigner, when he faces towards Jerusalem and raises his hands and prays, that God, would you answer his prayer? And God responds to that and says, "Yes, I will answer that foreigner's prayer." And so I think that's our place as Christians right now, to say, okay, we're going to be like Daniel was when he was outside, you know, the land of Israel. Next time, we're going to pray towards Jerusalem. We're going to recognize that the God that we're praying to is the God of Israel. And then through that, hopefully we can bring some reparation, and hopefully we can have opportunities to talk to people and explain why this deal of the century is not the same as the deal of eternity that God wants to bring to us.
I like that. The deal of eternity. Well, we got to take advantage of the deal of eternity. It only comes along once in a while, so you don't want to mess that up. But Zac, thank you so much for studying with me, and it's always great to speak with you. You're so energetic and passionate about Israel, and so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rabbi Tully. It's been really great being on with you. Blessings on you and all of your work too. We appreciate everything that you're doing.
All right, shalom, and we're gonna end the recording. But if anybody wants to ask some questions, let me see. Let me stop the recording.